They say every legend has a shadow, but some shadows are darker, deeper, and more complex than anyone dared to imagine. Tonight, we step behind the curtain of Hollywood's golden age into a world of champagne smiles, flashing cameras, and whispered secrets. And at the heart of it all stands one man, Burt Lancaster, a titan of the silver screen, a man who could command an audience with a single look and who carried secrets that could have shattered his career, his reputation, even his life. By the time he reached 80 years old, Burt had lived through war, scandal, love, and betrayal. He had charmed millions, defied Hollywood's studio system, and brought home an Oscar. But in those final years, he began to speak, quietly, privately, of passions and romances that the world was never meant to hear. What he revealed would challenge the image of the rugged screen hero forever and expose a hidden side of Hollywood that operated in shadows and silence. But before we get to the revelations that would shock even the most jaded Tinseltown insider, we need to go back to the beginning. Because the making of a legend is never as simple as the legend itself. Burt Lancaster was born Burton Stephen Lancaster on November 2nd, 1913, in Harlem, New York. Harlem at the time was alive, full of music, movement, and the grit of survival. His parents worked hard but scraped by, raising their children in a tight-knit working-class neighborhood where the streets were as much a classroom as any school. From an early age, Burt stood out. Not just for his height, though at over 6 feet tall, that certainly helped, but for his boundless energy. He wasn't content to sit in a classroom staring out the window. No, Burt wanted movement, adventure. And he found it in the unlikeliest of places, the circus. It's almost impossible to imagine now. The man who would one day be Hollywood's leading man, dangling from trapezes under a striped tent. But that's exactly where he owned his most famous qualities. Physical control, fearlessness, and the ability to hold an audience in the palm of his hand. The circus didn't just give him strength, it gave him presence. That ability to stride into a scene and make you forget anyone else was even there. And that presence was about to catch Hollywood's eye. In 1946, Burt made his screen debut in The Killers, a gritty noir based on Hemingway's short story. His performance wasn't just good, it was magnetic. Audiences saw not just a handsome man, but a man who could convey danger and vulnerability in the same breath. Hollywood had found its new hero. But here's the thing about Burt Lancaster. He never wanted to be just another matinee idol. He wanted control. He wanted roles that mattered. And in the 1950s, that desire led him to do something almost unheard of. He started his own production company, Hecht Hill Lancaster. At the time, studios like MGM and Warner Bros. Owned everything. The films, the scripts, even the actors. But Burt broke free. He chose his own projects, and in doing so, helped create some of the most honest human films of the decade. Marty in 1955 proved that you didn't need glamorous stars to make an unforgettable movie. And when it won Best Picture, Hollywood had to take him seriously, not just as an actor, but as a visionary. Still, Burt was never one to settle. Whether it was From Here to Eternity with that now iconic beach scene or his Oscar-winning role in Elmer Gantry, he pushed boundaries, both on screen and off. And off-screen? That's where the story turns. By the 1960s, Burt Lancaster wasn't just a star. He was a man whose face was instantly recognized around the globe. But he also carried something else, an unspoken understanding that some parts of his life could never be public. Hollywood was a place of illusions, and some illusions could not be broken without devastating consequences. The unwritten rule of the era was simple. The audience must believe the image. And for men like Burt, men who loved outside the boundaries of what was acceptable, the cost of truth was ruin. So he lived in two worlds, the one the cameras saw and the one hidden in the shadows. But in the final years of his life, perhaps feeling the weight of time, Burt began to open up. And what he said would leave even those closest to him stunned. He spoke of love affairs with some of the most famous men of his generation, men whose own public images were carefully protected, whose private truths were guarded like state secrets. And the first name he mentioned was Cary Grant. Now, Cary Grant was the epitome of Hollywood charm. Sharp suits, quick wit, a smile that could disarm anyone. Burt met him in the late 1940s at an industry party where the champagne flowed and the air was thick with cigarette smoke. They talked, and something clicked. Over the weeks that followed, the two began meeting in secret, renting small beach houses along the Pacific Coast Highway, where they could walk along the shore at night without fear of prying eyes. But here's where the tragedy of the time becomes clear. Carrie lived in constant fear of being exposed. In those days, a single rumor could destroy a career. And so, he ended it. Burt never spoke bitterly of Carrie, only with a quiet respect and a lingering sadness for what might have been. And if you think that's the most surprising name on Burt's list, you'd be wrong. The next was a man you wouldn't expect in a romantic confession at all. J. Edgar Hoover. Yes, that J. Edgar Hoover. The feared FBI director who held files on everyone, including Hollywood royalty. Their connection wasn't a conventional love story. It was tangled, strange, bound up in secrecy and power. Hoover was a man terrified of his own desires, yet drawn to Burt's confidence. Burt would later describe him as someone imprisoned by his own authority. It's a pairing that almost defies belief. And yet, when you understand the hidden networks of mid-century America, it starts to make sense. But the story doesn't stop there, because next came Hollywood's golden boy, Rock Hudson. Rock and Burt met in the early 1950s, both at the height of their fame. To the public, Rock was the ultimate ladies' man, but behind the scenes, the two embarked on a romance that took them far from the cameras. Long drives into the desert, quiet nights under endless skies. But like Carrie, Rock was haunted by the risk of exposure. His fear was justified. Decades later, his death from AIDS would force the world to confront the truth he had hidden. Burt remembered him as a beautiful soul who never truly felt safe to love. And just when you think you know where the story is going, Burt drops another name, Ricky Nelson. Ricky was nearly 20 years younger, a former child star trying to reinvent himself. They met in the early 1960s, and for Ricky, Burt became both a mentor and a protector. But Burt, perhaps sensing the pressures Ricky faced, ended the relationship gently, telling friends that Ricky kissed with the longing of someone never allowed to want. It was fleeting, but it stayed with him. And then came the storm. Marlon Brando. Brando was everything Lancaster wasn't. Volatile, unpredictable, brilliant in ways that bordered on madness. They met in the late 1950s, and the attraction was immediate. What followed was a romance like a wildfire, intense, exhilarating, and impossible to control. They fought, they reconciled, they pushed each other to emotional extremes. Burt would later say Brando was the only person who could completely captivate him with a single glance. But two strong wills, forced to live in secrecy, eventually tore apart. And yet, the respect never faded. When Burt spoke of these men in his final years, it wasn't to shock, it was to unburden, to tell the truth before it was lost forever. He knew the risks he took, even in silence, and he knew the price of living in a world that demanded you hide who you were. It's easy to remember Burt Lancaster as the hero on the battlefield, the romantic on the beach, the con man with a silver tongue. But behind the roles was a man who loved deeply, fought fiercely for justice, and carried his truths quietly until the very end. And maybe that's why his story matters even more now, because it's a reminder that even legends are human. If you've been caught up in Burt Lancaster's untold story so far, make sure you subscribe to Dark Celebrity Truths right now. We have more stories coming, and trust me, the secrets only get darker from here. In October of 1994, Burt's life came to a quiet close in his Los Angeles apartment after a third heart attack. There was no grand funeral, no public spectacle. His ashes were scattered beneath a large oak in Westwood Memorial Park, marked only by a simple plaque. No crowds, no speeches. Just a quiet goodbye to a man who had once been one of the most visible faces in the world and one of its most invisible hearts. And maybe, in that simplicity, Burt Lancaster finally found the peace that had eluded him all those years. Like this video if you believe every legend's full story deserves to be told. And subscribe for more Dark Celebrity Truths. Because behind every smile, every spotlight, there's always more than meets the eye. Fame hides everything until it doesn't.